Welcome once again. It's Professor Howard Williams here. I'm presenting now with one of my students, Chloe Bridge, one of my second year students who volunteered to do some work on this sort of sideline project on Digi-Dykes with me, and she's going to be busy adding some content, some digital content about what's Dyke, but I hope it provides an experiment, a first step in a broader project. So let's proceed with this short presentation. Now, the first thing to say is that the linear earthworks of the Anglo-Welsh borders, Offa's Dyke and Watts Dyke, are the focus of the Offa's Dyke Collaboratory, and we hope to engage people in new ways with these ancient monuments. And this is to illustrate to you the line of Watts Dyke running down through Flintshire and Wrexham and Shropshire, and the longer line where it survives of Offa's Dyke running all the way down, crossing the Herefordshire Plain, and then we pick it up in the Wye Valley again. And there's me in cartoon form, thanks to John Swagger. Gave me a cartoon rendition, which probably looks more like me than I do, and showing you something of the vision we have for the Offa's Dyke Collaboratory. And we want to do new research, but also to make people think in new ways and to engage people in new ways about these linear monuments. They are huge. This is a photograph showing you Offa's Dyke at Bronigarth, and in the background you can see Chirk Castle, the 13th and 14th century castle sitting overlooking the area where the Dee Valley and the Ceiriog Valley sort of come closer together, not the exact confluence, but coming close together. So it controls this borderland location in a strategic sense in a later period, in the late Middle Ages. But here's Offa's Dyke doing it at an earlier phase in monumental work. And it's almost so big, it's very difficult to get local people and communities to feel a sense of ownership with it. It's always someone else's. It's always bigger than any individual locality. And that is therefore part of the challenge of monuments that are so big, you can't almost see them. You can't really conceptualize them in their full magnitude. And that's part of the challenge, I think. Also part of the challenge is that monuments like Offa's Dyke and Watts Dyke, and here's two views of Offa's Dyke at Discoid, they vary incredibly in the scale of survival. So on the right here, there's Liam Delaney, there's Brian Costello, another doctoral researcher, and there's Natalie Fried, historian, on the massive surviving slope of the bank and into the ditch of Offa's Dyke. And yet, just a few hundred metres upslope, where the angle of slope is different and the monument's been more readily eroded away, that lovely little lamb there is sitting on what survives of Offa's Dyke running through the field. They're the same monument. I suspect originally they were built to the same scale, but they've survived due to different processes of erosion, different processes of land management. They've survived in very different scales within a very close proximity to each other. And that makes the point that really apprehending the monument, even if you have one section that really shows, well, is good, has a good preservation, trying to understand the broader extent of the monument is very, very difficult indeed. And there are standard ways, established ways in which people engage with this monument. The pathways, the long distance trail, the path, it's maps, of course. So here's a section of the Ordnance Survey map showing Bronigarth and the Offa's Dyke path running down, and the hashers you probably can't see, but running next to it of the monument, and their heads off up over there's Chirk Castle and then across through to the Chirk Estate. And therefore, you maps are one way you can begin to understand it. And of course, there are traditional books, academic books, Fox's 1955 publication, The Definitive Survey, well, a survey of Offa's Dyke, Frank Noble's unfinished Offa's Dyke Reviewed, looking at the southern and middle stretches, the 2003 book by Hill and Worthington, Mark Bell's The Archaeology of the Dykes, and Ray and Baptiste's new Offa's Dyke, Landscape and Hegemony in 8th Century Britain. So these books are accessible. People can read them, but there's only a limited number of people who are going to be reading those kind of more detailed texts. And so the question for us in the Offa's Dyke Collaboratory is, there are the long-distance walkers. There are the people who will go and walk a bit of Offa's Dyke. There are people who will read about it, and maybe there'll be people who do all of those things. But what about the broader swathe of the British public and the wider international and global communities that may be interested in Offa's Dyke as an ancient borderland feature, an ancient frontier work, an ancient sort of monument in the landscape, but they may not have access to these. Many of these books are out of date. Very few are in print. And likewise maps, and likewise, not everyone has access to the landscape and the monument itself. Now, if you walk along Offa's Dyke or Watts Dyke, you will come across various heritage boards. Here's a very faded one in the Kerryog Valley, where Offa's Dyke is contextualised in relation to warfare throughout the ages, warfare in the valley, the 1282 Churt Castle construction, the Battle of Croghan in 1165, and Offa's Dyke, given that late 8th century Offa reign as its construction parameters, 857 to 9796. They're seen as part of a broader landscape of conflict, which is very interesting. I mean, but it's faded. This is on Offa's Dyke. On a walk, you won't come across this. It's not by a popular roadside. You have to have walked a good half mile to actually access this heritage board, and it's obviously older and wearing out. And I've come across heritage boards that you're completely invisible now at various locations along Offa's Dyke and Watts Dyke. So they have their function, but they also have limited information that becomes quite rapidly dated, and they're subject to damage and wear and all sorts of other restrictions on access and engagement with them. And there's very few of these, actually, up and down Offa's Dyke and Watts Dyke. There are very few heritage sites or interpretation boards where you can really understand something about the monument. Here's another one. This is one of the better ones on the Hawthorne Hill in Powys. This is south of Knighton, where you've got some information about Offa's Dyke, a powerful king, and 4 miles, 2 monuments, and a battlefield, giving you a sense of the other features in the local landscape. This is one of my favourite locations because the heritage information is on a post, and it's a very limited, and it simply tells you this is where engineering marvels meet, because this is an interesting point. This is where the Pangolin Canal, very early 19th century canal building, cut through Offa's Dyke. So here's the canal, if you didn't guess, and there's Offa's Dyke, the 8th century linear earthwork coming down into the Dee Valley, and it's cut by the canal. And this is also the last point where you're walking north, and the first point walking south, where you actually on the Offa's Dyke path you encounter Offa's Dyke. So this is an important point for the relationship of the path and the dyke, and it has a short text explaining about the Anglo-Saxon king who's thought to have built the dyke in confrontation to his Welsh rivals. So you get some information out of that, but it's limited. So no matter how many heritage boards you have, and there aren't that many, no matter how many books you have, and there aren't that many, and no matter how many maps you own, and there aren't that many, and there's only a certain amount of information you can gain from them, there's only so much that these kind of media can convey about Offa's Dyke for most public and tourists and visitors to the landscapes, and local people too. This is another example that's frustrating because it raises another issue. This is a heritage board at New Brighton in the Beaufort Park Hotel's front area, where you can see the dyke. It's well preserved, well mown, and you've got a heritage board, sort of interpretation panel explaining the monument. But it's a bit out of date, and one could also argue that perhaps the stylisation of the warriors is not only a bit historically inaccurate, but may convey some racial stereotypes about the Anglo-Saxons and the Britons or the Welsh and their appearance. And so one could make a point that perhaps it's conceptualising Watts Dyke in this case as a border line and an ethno-linguistic border line, and that may not actually be what these monuments are about at all in the early Middle Ages. So there's the issue of misinformation and, should we say, outdated information that some of these boards contain. One also has to make the point that actually there's a broader landscape that commemorates or observes the presence of Offa's Dyke and Watts Dyke. These are some examples from Mynydd Isa associated with the line of Watts Dyke, where Englefield Crescent, Forth Offa, Watts Dyke Way, actually that's up in Salton, but Mercy and Drive in Mynydd Isa. These names encapsulate some early medieval history, but in an area where the dyke has been destroyed. So we have a challenge there. So to overcome, because of this is one of the reasons why we established the Offa's Dyke Collaboratory website. And it's also one of the reasons why we have created a resource that can be accessed for people wanting to go beyond the basic information and a few sort of snapshots to get some more enriched, deep understanding of resources and discussions about the latest interpretations. And that's the other reason of creating a whole academic, peer-reviewed, open access journal called the Offa's Dyke Journal. Not that all the content is about Offa's Dyke, but that it's a way in of information and resource of classics revisited articles and brand new original articles that allow people to access a one-stop shop for all things to do with linear monuments. And I think that's really an important way forward. But equally, though, I must say that this product is only part of the picture. And there are other digital resources out there that I think we need to explore. And in that regard, I'd like to go over and talk about where do these dykes sit online. Well, I would say that there is the traditional website, the Offa's Dyke Association. The website has a little bit about the history of the monument. There are individual heritage sites. This is from Erddig Park, where I would criticise Erddig National Trust for making the dyke almost invisible in the map of the landscape. The dyke isn't marked out. All of the interpretation panels around the Erddig National Trust site, you can't see where the dyke is unless you already know and you're an expert in early medieval linear monuments. You're not going to really know the monuments there. It's only far down in one of their online walking trails that you actually come across point 10. Is it point 10? Yeah. And you click on here and you get a little bit of discussion of Watts Dyke, misinforming you about the date of the monument, but giving you some basic information about Watts Dyke, but then not actually telling you where it can be found in the landscape. So I'm not really convinced that this is adequately making people aware of this premier heritage site in the Anglo-Welsh borderlands, making people aware of the significance of Watts Dyke. Another example is the website of English Heritage for the, usually outside of our current crisis, open, accessible for local people, for Oswestry inhabitants and the old Oswestry Hill fort, a major focus of contestation at the moment over heritage planning and house building. And the English Heritage website has lots of really good information about the phasing of the monument and its prehistory. And it does have a little bit of information about Watts Dyke and Offa's Dyke and where old Oswestry Hill fort sat in that early medieval landscape. But it's rather abrupt and rather limited, and it basically doesn't even locate on the ground where Watts Dyke is in relation to these earthworks. So what I'm suggesting is that these kind of digital resources by heritage sites along Offa's Dyke and Watts Dyke, as well as general information available through the Offa's Dyke Association, don't get you very far. Now, I'm going to be cursory, but I would also contend that nobody is really going to look at the many records on Coffline, the Royal Commission of Ancient and Historical Monuments for Wales site, where you can access descriptions of particular locations of individual monuments. But these work particularly poorly for linear monuments, where different stretches and different elements require you to really navigate over large distances. While there's some good resources here, allowing you to explore information about the monument, you're not going to really, this isn't really public facing in a full sense of the word. It's not easily accessible. On Aquilio, for the Welsh Trust's Historic Environment Records for Wales, you can search for, in this case I've searched for Offa's Dyke, although it doesn't like the apostrophe, so I've called it Offa's Dyke. And you can go into and explore records about individual monument locations along the line of the monument on the Welsh side of the border, and at least it has a really valuable interface that allows you to, map-based interface, to explore the records, and there's aerial photographs and so on. The English side, this is Shropshire, perhaps less satisfactory again. There is information here, there's details, but it's really for the planning process, it's for the schedule process, it's not really public facing in the sense of, you can't imagine many people are going to dip into this to learn as part of a school project or part of any other kind of project. So that's part of the reason why we've got our website, that's part of the reason why we created the journal. But the question is, how do we improve and enhance the quality of other digitally available materials about these monuments? And I've got three areas for just brief discussion. Firstly, I think there is a merit in actively improving what's available on Wikipedia. Now, I have mixed feelings with this as someone who has tried to work on Wikipedia and revise things for the better and found that I've been edited out because many of the changes I'm trying to make cannot be verified within the pool of dreadful information already out there and digitally available. But so I have mixed feelings about the quality and character of work on Offa's Dyke, but at least here there is a range of resources and materials available. And likewise for Watts Dyke, I was pleased to see that someone has added already a link to the Offa's Dyke journal here, and so you can link through to Margaret Worthington Hill's recently published paper, republished paper, in the Offa's Dyke journal. But still, I think there's a lot more detail that could be put into individual stretches of both Offa's Dyke and Watts Dyke on Wikipedia to allow people to know what they're looking at particular locations in particular areas. Another option is Google Earth, which has been used by heritage professionals and archaeologists elsewhere to really enhance the record. If you go to Watts Dyke, search for Watts Dyke on Google Earth, you'll find the primary school, and you'll find this is the line of Watts Dyke actually coming through here, which is preserved in North Wrexham, and there it goes through to Pandy. But you're focusing on road names, and if you search for likewise, if you search for Offa's Dyke, you really are only taken to the Offa's Dyke Centre in Knighton, and rather than the monument itself. And there's a Knighton BMX skate park. You don't get an appreciation of the monument itself as it runs across and up over this wonderful landscape. And I wonder if there's a lot more that could be done here, because here's Offa's Dyke running up on the hills, up Panpuntum Hill, onto Consamanum Hill, and there's a lot more you can do to explore the monument on here, and information could be added, and it's just not there in the current form. And another area that we could be looking at more is the megalithic portal, which has put up a host of crowd-funded information about ancient, prehistoric mainly, monuments, but also looking at Hadrian's Wall. There's a few features, but they haven't put their efforts in, and perhaps because linear monuments don't have the same aura as megalithic tombs and stone circles and standing stones. But they're also more complicated because they're multi-point sites. You need to understand how they work in the landscape. And so the entries for linear monuments here are going to be more challenging to create. But Watts Dyke doesn't even feature yet, and that's one of the things that Chloe and I are going to try and work to rectify, that the megalithic portal has entries for key points of Dyke along its course where we can add information that'll be of value to visitors and enthusiasts. And but Andy Burnham of the Megalithic Portal has already generously added an entry, the first proper entry for Offa's Dyke for us. And I think going to that gives you an illustration of the potential. So here he's crowdsourced some images. He's also utilised one of my images there and put up basic information, which we're going to add to, obviously, about Offa's Dyke north of Trefonen, which you can watch about in my virtual tour later in the day. So my simple point is, and Chloe and my simple point is that actually existing digital resources are inadequate. And while our Collaboratory website and our journal go a long way to rectify that situation, I think there are other media out there that really do require further investment of time and energy, and maybe through crowdfunding or supporting a sort of citizen science projects, we can get richer, more accurate, up-to-date information onto these portals about not only the interpretation of these monuments, but also their management and conservation threats to them and so on. And this is very much an idea that isn't mine. It very much comes in collaboration and through discussions with Mel Roxby-Mackay and Ian Mackay, who've been working on the community stewardship of Mercy and Monuments project, COSM, and they've proposed a lot of this already and presented a lot of these ideas already about how do we get local people engaged in helping to enhance the information available online, recording for the benefit of conservation management and interpretation. So I share that spirit with them, but I also think there's a lot of existing platforms out here that we could easily augment. Wikipedia, Google Earth, and the Megalithic Portal are three, and I'm sure there are others, and I look forward to hearing further suggestions of what we could do. Now, this is a big project, and it's something we've only just started thinking about, but I think with feedback from everybody who's listening to this video, and with over the next couple of years, we can really transform the digital footprint, shall we say, of Offa's Dyke and Watts Dyke, so that people have a greater awareness and perhaps an understanding of these important linear earthworks for the communities close to them and for people visiting them from far and wide, or simply wanting to learn about them from other parts of the globe. Thank you very much for your time, and do stay around for the virtual tour later in the day.